Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, we're going to look at the 7th book in the Princess Diaries. So this is Party Princess. So a couple of things are going on with this book. So Mia finds out she put the wrong person in charge of the treasury because she's the student class president. We have jumped time-wise. The last book was in beginning of their sophomore year. This is March. So we've jumped from September to March. So the student government is broke, so they can't pay for prom because they spent a bunch of money on fancy recycling bins. And so they have to figure out how to put on the prom without, and Mia's terrified of the valedictorian, who's apparently very large, and she's, I think, part of the lacrosse team, so Mia's terrified of her. And the other thing that's going on that's kind of a big deal is Michael's parents are going out of town, and he's supposed to basically look after Lily because Lily is slightly crazy. She may be 16, but apparently she can't be left alone. Last time they did this, she apparently invited her stalker over and did strange things. This is the guy who's obsessed with feet. May have mentioned him probably in the first book. He's not been brought up since the first book until this. So Michael wants to put on a party for a lot of his college friends. Mia's terrified because she's 16 and college girls, college boys, and she's highly intimidated because, again, she's 16 and a sophomore in high school, and Mia has issues with self-esteem. One thing I forgot to, the other things that are periodically mentioned, I forgot to mention in the last book. They have a new English teacher who's trying to push Mia to be better writer and doesn't particularly like pop culture references, so Mia's having issues. That's following through the rest of these previous two books, where she's battling essentially her English teacher, who's slightly irritating and probably not wrong in pushing Mia to be better in her writing, and Mia doesn't particularly like that. So she's also still in earth science. That's something else I forgot to mention because, again, the beginning of the year. And she's still with Kenny, the ex-boyfriend, who I think makes up a girlfriend, and he finally admits it because he kind of still likes Mia to an extent. He has issues in the following book. We'll get to that. Kenny does some interesting things. So the student government is broke, and Mia is terrified about this girl beating her up because of the valedictorian, because they don't have the money for prom. And Michael is putting on this party. So these are the two major events. Then in comes Grandmère, who, in order to help Mia pay for prom and satisfy her own vanity, because of course everything revolves around Grandmère in her head, decides to have written a musical based on Mia's Genovian ancestor who started the country, whose the background basically is this woman was forced to marry the man who murdered her father. She ends up murdering him and rescuing something, and given land by the King of Spain. So that is how this comes about. So Grandma writes a musical about this and inserts some farm boy that this woman is in love with. The entire reason for this has to do with the fact that, and this is a real thing, south of Dubai, in the real world, you have a bunch of man-made islands. And now this is the fictional part. There's one for Genovia, this tiny little, basically big enough for an estate. And this Broadway producer is putting bids on it. And his son goes to school with them. Mia has no idea who he is. Grandma's mentioned his name. They're in the same class. Turns out he's the guy who complains about corn and chili. That's how he's been described previously. His real name is JP. He becomes a prominent character in the next several books until Forever Princess, which is the last of the teen series before it jumps 6 years into Mia's adulthood. So we'll get there. So Grandmère puts on auditions for the school to put on this musical. And Mia is forced into the position of her ancestor. JP is this farm boy. Again, Grandma's tried to link them together. Kenny ends up becoming the king, who Mia kills. Lily, despite having a better audition than Mia, who was forced into auditioning by Grandmere, of course she was, ends up becoming the mistress, and you have various people, including this senior that Mia's afraid of, who's in the chorus. And they are putting this on within a week for a huge benefit for the Olive Growers Association, with the who's who of all sorts of people. And Lena basically blackmails Mia into getting her tickets because I can't remember who's there that she wants to see. There's a whole bunch of celebrities there. They drop names like crazy. Because Lena has figured out that they're broke, and the student government is broke because of recycling bins. So that's the other big thing. So they're exhausted trying to rehearse for all of this. And Mia's princess lessons are canceled in order for them to do rehearsals. And then, of course, Mia's obsessing over this party, which she eventually goes to and tries to dress in a beret and dance. And she does end up, I think, dancing with JP. Somehow JP ends up at this party. And being very, very weird. And the other thing that is found out that's kind of dropped on them, that Michael's parents show up. Party ends. Mia leaves because she's embarrassed. But Michael's parents are separating. And they haven't told Lily yet, so they tell Michael because he's older. They don't want to tell Lily because she's younger. I mean, I think he's at least 19 at this point, or close to it. So that's a thing that happens. Apparently, the parents have been fighting over some sort of psychology thing. It's eventually, and it's also something that why on earth Lily's been a little crazy lately is because she realizes her parents are fighting like crazy, and she's been living with it for the last year. And the parents weren't really going out of town for this party. Or for a conference. It was a last ditch effort to have a marathon marriage counseling session. So the parents end up separating at the end of this book. And then it's very, very interesting. Again, you get introduced. A lot of this is showing Mia's insecurities, but also introducing JP as a character. That's the major thing in this book, is JP being introduced as a major character. Because he has a major role in the next 3 books. And pretty sure, yeah, that's most of this book. Mia makes a fool of herself. This play comes off really, really well. I believe Mia convinces Lily to introduce JP because she was talking to some fancy director that JP's admired. And he does get the whole background on the corn thing. Apparently his parents, he's never met this guy that he's massively admired, but years in the past, when his parents went to a party, happened to tell this guy a story about JP after eating corn as a baby, and then basically his not digesting it. And that's why he hates corn, because his parents told his idol a baby story about him, which is highly embarrassing. Kind of understandable. So he's never liked corn since. So it's interesting. And Lily introduces him, and they're talking to a variety of different people, including like Spielberg and various other fancy names that you hear about these days at this huge benefit. They get the money for prom. And I think that's pretty much it. And JP admits, and Mia and JP learn to know each other. Again, that's the core of the point of this book, besides Mia being a 16-year-old girl and dealing with a bunch of stuff, is to introduce this JP character as a character. And there's a lot of fast forwarding of character development in him. So that's really it for Party Princesses. This is book 7. We are nearing the end because there's 11 books in the series. The next book jumps to the beginning of her junior year, and that covers an entire week. That's it. Then you have, and that is Princess on the Brink, which I will cover next. Then you have Princess Mia, which covers the next couple of weeks, and puts some interesting things in place. And then you have Forever Princess, which does make an absolute utter massive jump. Goes from September of her junior year to the end of her senior year. And then after that, you have the first adult novel, which is Royal Wedding, which makes a 6-year jump. And it also, there's a huge publishing gap between Forever Princess in 2009 to the Royal Wedding in 2015. So that is it for this review. Be sure to check out the rest of the channel. Covered all the Princess Diary books. I do a bunch of other series. This is the lightest and the fluffiest of what I've covered so far. Otherwise, I cover children's picture books, some teen stuff, some educational stuff, various films, and travel stuff, and homeschooling stuff. So be sure to check out the rest of the channel, like and subscribe, and see what I've got. Thank you.